Have you ever actually looked up at the night sky and just thought about that massive, seemingly endless void between the stars? I mean, we're taught from a very young age that space is, well, mostly empty, right? Just a vast vacuum where matter occasionally clumps together. But I want you to hold on to that thought and really prepare to have it completely dismantled. What if empty space isn't empty at all? What if what we casually call nothingness is actually the hardest, most rigid substance in existence?
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're exploring a deeply fascinating and genuinely mind-bending collection of source materials centered around a framework known as the cosmic regulator plenum hypothesis, authored by a thinker referred to as the Archer. Now, we're going to treat this hypothesis as an intellectual sandbox, okay? It is a radical departure from standard physics, attempting to solve cosmic mysteries by totally reimagining the fundamental architecture of our universe. My goal today isn't to tell you what's absolute truth. Instead, I want to enthusiastically guide you through the intricate geometric logic of these texts. It's a brilliantly detailed perspective, and I am so excited to unpack this with you. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for the journey. First, the solid universe illusion. Then, the spark and the tilt. Third, the geometry of reality. Fourth, the biology of perception. And finally, the sovereign observer. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the solid universe illusion, rethinking empty space. So the foundation of this entire hypothesis relies on totally rejecting the standard model's idea that the universe is made of isolated objects floating around in a vacuum. Instead, the source text proposed that the universe is a plenum. Now, what does that mean? The plenum is described as a dense, continuous, highly pressurized solid-state medium. It's literally dark everything. Think of it less like an empty room and more like a room completely filled from floor to ceiling with liquid concrete. What standard physics calls dark matter, this hypothesis argues, is actually this rigid, non-vibrating concrete that forms the absolute walls of reality. In this framework, visible matter, stars, planets, even your own body, isn't an object sitting freely in space. It's just a localized vibration, an excitation actively buzzing within this high-density background. Simply put, we don't live in space, we live within the regulator. Moving right along to Section 2, the spark and the tilt. Mechanical gears. So, if the universe is essentially this solid block of pressurized dark matter, how in the world did anything start moving? Well, forget the Big Bang. According to the text, perfect symmetry creates perfect stasis. An explosion just wouldn't work here. For our universe to exist, there had to be a deviation. The text argues that existence was actually triggered by a 1 in a trillion anomaly, a big ripple, if you will. And the magic number behind that ripple? Exactly 1.5 degrees. This tiny 1.5 degree deviation from absolute verticality acted as a cosmic kickstart. It created an initial rotational force, a torque, forcing energy to expand not randomly, but in a highly specific vector, a counterclockwise Fibonacci sequence. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and so on. This mechanism is proposed as the exact reason why biological life, like DNA, planetary orbits, and galactic spirals, inherently favor a leftward, counterclockwise rotation. It's built right in. So, the crucial point here is that the universe isn't spinning in a vacuum. Because it's spinning inside that incredibly dense solid-state plenum we just talked about, it hits profound resistance. The text calls this plenum drag. Think about it. If you try to push a spinning object straight through a solid medium, you generate massive friction. That 1.5 degree ignition impulse hits the physical drag of the dark matter lattice, which mathematically bends the axis an additional 0.22 degrees backward. So 1.5 plus 0.22 equals exactly 1.72 degrees. The text describes 1.72 degrees as the literal thread count of dark matter. It acts as an angle of attack, a necessary yaw that actually allows reality to cleanly slice through the medium without stalling out. Let's actually break down the mechanical gears of this process. Step 1. You have the absolute rigidity of the substrate, that's the dark matter resistance. Step 2, that initial 1.5 degree tilt begins to torque and twist aggressively against the plenum. And step 3, well, that is where matter is born. The torque causes virtual strings to mirror and wrap around each other. Once they wrap at that highly specific angle, they form a stable, mathematically indestructible knot. The text argues that something like a proton, for example, is literally just a knot of resonance trapped in a specific geometric lock. Meaning all the matter we see, everything we interact with, is essentially just these torsorial knots constantly fighting against the immense pressure of the plenum, trying to straighten them out. That brings us to Section 3, the geometry of reality, the structured universe. So, how does all this chaotic, twisting energy organize itself into the beautifully structured universe we recognize? The hypothesis introduces a proprietary term for this called resonance isomatics. Let's break that down for a second. Resonance is the vibration generated by the friction of the tilt moving through the dark matter. Isomatics is the mathematical law that forces that wild vibration into a balanced, repeating geometric grid. This is the absolutely crucial locking mechanism. Without it, the universe would just be a mess of chaotic noise and heat. Resonance isomatics is the fundamental function that takes the raw, unstructured hum of the universe and forces it to settle into a structured song of mathematics and physics. And this brilliantly illustrates the concept by comparing it to cymatics, which is the study of visible sound. If you place sand on a metal plate and drag a violin bow across the edge, the sand doesn't just vibrate randomly all over the place. The specific frequencies force the sand to literally snap into sharp, incredibly complex geometric mandalas. In this hypothesis, the metal plate is the cosmic plenum. The violin bow is that 1.5-degree axial tilt. The sand, that's the stars, the galaxies, and the planets. And the intricate pattern that emerges is resonance isomatics. We are the sand, locked perfectly into place by the vibration of the universe. Now, the foundational frequency of this cosmic metal plate is proposed to be exactly 144 Hertz. The text points out that 144 is a massive mathematical threshold. See, 144 is the 12th number in the Fibonacci sequence, and get this, it is the only number in that infinite sequence that is a perfect square. 12 times 12. Therefore, it acts as the mathematical locking mechanism where infinite outward spiral growth mathematically translates into a rigid, stable grid structure. The hypothesis suggests that energy events actually have to breach this specific 144 Hertz threshold to alter the physical reality of the grid in any meaningful way. All right, Section 4, the biology of perception, the body as interceptor. We've been talking a lot about galaxies, dark matter, and universal frequencies. But let's pivot and zoom all the way down to your actual physical body. Now, what's really interesting here is how the author maps the precise anatomy of the human eye directly to the architecture of the universe, suggesting the eye is essentially a biological plenum interceptor. Consider the retina. It's described as the biological equivalent of the universal grid, actively detecting the ripples and motion of the plenum. And the optic nerve? The text compares it to a black hole event. It takes 130 million photoreceptors and physically crushes that massive amount of data down into just 1.2 million nerve fibers. That is an astounding compression ratio. And think about astigmatism. In standard optics, it's just a refractive error. But in this hypothesis, it is literally a tilt error, a geometric failure where light hits the biological sensor outside of that ideal 1.72-degree angle, causing your perception of reality to physically smear. The most staggering biological claim centers around the fovea centralis. Think about it. Most of human vision is actually just peripheral blur. You only have 20/20 perfect resolution in a tiny, highly focused spot on the retina. The exact center of this focus, governed by the physics of light and a limitation known as the Rayleigh criterion, has a specific angular width. And wouldn't you know it, that sweet spot of perfect visual reality is almost exactly 1.72 degrees wide. The text points out this incredible mathematical coincidence, that the human eye's absolute biological limit for focused reality perfectly matches the 1.72-degree tilt thread of the universe itself. As the author states, we are living inside the fovea of God, meaning reality is only completely solid exactly where we're looking. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the sovereign observer, subjective reality. Let's move to and see how this builds from the biological hardware up to the subjective experience of reality itself. These concepts build a totally fascinating, yet honestly kind of terrifying case against the idea of a shared reality. The hypothesis argues there is literally zero logical reason to assume your red is the same as my red. First off, the random seed protocol. Human brains grow in the totally dark womb, right? Without a master color chart. They just assign random internal variables to different external light frequencies. Second, look at synesthesia. People with crossed neural wires might hear a C sharp and literally see the color blue. This proves the brain's internal video card is totally programmable. Color isn't an external truth, it's just a biological notification light. And finally, tetrachromats. These are people, mostly women actually, who possess a rare fourth color cone. They can look at a seemingly plain beige wall and see loud, vivid, complex colors that you and I physically cannot even imagine.
Because they have upgraded hardware, they literally download a completely different world. Our hardware limits the reality we can experience.
Bringing this all together, the hypothesis posits a really profound conclusion. The underlying mathematical structure, the dense dark matter plenum, the 1.72-degree geometric grid, that is the only thing we actually share. But the render, the colors, the textures, the specific internal feelings of your experience, that is the totally exclusive sovereign creation of the observer. You are the sole architect of your visual world. No one has ever visited your specific reality, and absolutely no one ever will. We've traveled from the rigid, pressurized expanse of the cosmic plenum, traced the 1.5-degree spark that knotted energy right into matter, and followed that mathematical thread straight into the 1.72-degree focal point of your own eye. We've seen how the source material argues that while the universal grid is absolute, the reality you experience is a closed loop, painted entirely by your own biological machinery. Which leaves us with one final haunting thought to take away from this explainer today. If the universe is really just a shared grid of vibrations, and your brain is entirely making up the interface, whose colors are you rendering right now?